Hello everyone, today we will continue to go over a question from the CK question bank. Today we're on the second question, which is about ingress. This question has actually undergone some changes in the latest version, mainly in terms of parameters. Normally, the main purpose of this question is just to have us create a standard ingress resource. However, we need to pay attention to things like the namespace and the resource name. These details are important. Secondly, when we create this ingress, what do we need to use first? We definitely need to reference the service that already exists. The service has already been created, so we don't need to create it again. Please pay attention to this point. Also, when we create this ingress at the same time, what we need to pay attention to is that when we finally create the ingress resource, what do we need to specify? The main things we need to specify include the following: our name, namespace, and also the service resource, as well as our domain name, path, and so on, including an ingress class name. These are actually the basic configurations that we need to specify in our final YAML file. As for the rest, actually, the exam question has clearly provided them, such as the service name, port number, right? All of this information is actually given in the question. The port number is 8080, and the name is the service name, which is also provided. The path, domain name, and so on are all fine as well. The only piece of information not provided in the question is the name of the ingress class. This is actually the parameter I just mentioned that can change. In the earliest versions, the name we used was... Later on, some new names appeared as well, mainly changes in parameter names. The overall solution to this problem hasn't really changed, but the parameters themselves have undergone some changes. For example, in later versions, besides the original, there are also names like traffic. There are also names like age proxy and so on. Any of these names are possible. So everyone needs to pay attention here. When you're specifying things as usual, you must pay close attention to the ingress information. You must pay attention to this US information. The most important thing is actually the ingress class name. If you get this name wrong, right, the whole problem will arise when you specify it here. Because for this entire question, if you need to write a file, it's basically just that. It's just one file, just a single file. So whenever we're checking here, everyone needs to pay attention to this name, right? Whether the resource name is correct, this is something we need to be mindful of. This is the main thing to watch out for in this question. Next, let's take a closer look at how to handle this problem, how to approach it. First of all, the first step is that we need to connect to the correct corresponding cluster. This is the first step. Then secondly, what do we need to do? First, check the name of our ingress class. After finding out the name, we can then go ahead and formally create our ingress file. Alright, next, let's take a look at how to specifically handle this particular question. Alright, first let's connect to our corresponding cluster node. Then what do we do next? The very first step is to check the ingress information mentioned in the question. That is the ingress class. In the information, it will give us this name. Here, what we mainly care about is the name part. Here, everyone should pay attention. During the exam, the name might not necessarily be the same. It could be changed to a new name when you take the test. So there's no need to memorize the names of all these resources, right? You only need to use the ones required. If you need to check something, you can do it yourself during the exam, right? Use the get command or any other command to check, and once there's no problem, what do we do next? Then you can just go ahead and apply it. Next, we can edit our ingress. You just need a configuration file for this. The main thing here is to make sure that the ingress class name matches correctly in the file. As long as it matches, that's fine. Then after we come in here, this is the effect we get. What everyone needs to pay attention to here is this. In the exam, as we can clearly see here, and it is something that absolutely everyone already knows, right? What we just mentioned actually contains an incredibly large and diverse amount of complex content, quite a lot indeed, though. So if you feel that this is really far too long to handle, what specific steps or actions can you actually take? You can copy from the official documentation, but one thing you need to pay attention to is that the content in the official documentation is actually not complete. It's not entirely comprehensive, so after you copy it, you'll need to fill in some of the corresponding content yourself. So for this question, there are basically two approaches. If you're confident in your memory, you can just write out the file yourself, right? That works too. The other way is to go to the documentation and copy it first. You can copy a template, and once you have the template, you just need to fill in the remaining information yourself. Just complete the rest of the information, and that's it. Here, for all the various names like namespace, name, and so on, you just need to write them one by one according to the requirements in the question. And here, actually, the most important configurations are these. First of all, we have this part This is the first one. This is the main configuration block. These two lines are mainly for what? They are mainly to redirect the requested URL path to our directory. Of course, this doesn't mean the system root directory, but rather the root directory of our website, the site root directory. Here, the path is relatively long. The specific content is quite lengthy, so please pay attention when writing it. Make sure not to make any mistakes. This is mainly to work together with what's below, because in a moment we'll also be writing something else, specifically our path. Since here, we're basically redirecting our path to the root directory after that. So what's next? For our path here, what do we need to specify? Actually, we need to specify this. As for the path that follows, we need to specify the exact path we want to access because the problem statement has requirements. Ultimately, which segment do you need to access for it to count as successful? It's our domain name plus a path. A domain name followed by a segment of the path. So when we start, the first thing is to get the domain name. Of course, before writing the domain name here, we need to use what we just looked up. For the ingress, as for the class name, we need to fill it in at this position. And here, you need to pay attention to the name. Whatever you found, that's what you should write. Then, in the specific rules below, you can start writing our domain name. For the domain name, it's under hosts, or host. For the domain name, just follow the requirements specified in the problem statement. For example, example.org or like this. Next is our path. As we just mentioned, what do you need to pay attention to regarding the path? That is, after specifying the one above, you can think of it as first redirecting the request to the root directory. Then, according to the requirements in the problem statement, we need to add the path that needs to be accessed as specified in the problem. We also need to write that in here. So for the path, we add the route here. Here, everyone needs to pay attention to this. The path here works like this. For higher levels, the indentation here is negative. For lower levels, it's a single indentation. So what does this mean? It means that under path, you can write multiple entries, right? Each path is a separate one, and of course, each path cannot be duplicated. That is our path. Now for the next step, let's incorporate a backend. So what does this mean? It refers to our backend service, which is also the service in our service resource. And here, what we need to specify is as required by the problem statement, and it's the same here. It just needs to be a name type. It is certainly possible that things might change. It could very well change. It would be difficult to definitively state that it is a completely different question, but there are quite a few significant variations and differences from what we had originally anticipated. In general, for most of these parameters, the degree of change is usually not very significant, but if you encounter situations, for example, where the port has changed, if the requirement for the port is no longer 8080 but has changed to 8000, you need to pay attention to that as well. These are some of the points we need to be aware of. This file, relatively speaking, is indeed more of a metaphor. Other questions will be longer. So for this question, it's best if you either memorize this file yourself or you can use the official documentation, specifically the example or template document, to make some modifications accordingly. Actually, there are a lot of things to modify here, including things like the port number, the service name, the path, the domain name, and even the redirect above. All of these need to be changed. All of them require modifications. As for this part, we won't check it. As usual, we won't check it. We'll just execute it directly. Yeah, we won't check it. We'll just execute it directly and let the system check it for us. If it's correct, then it's fine, right? If it's not, then we'll go back and fix it. Right? This file does look pretty long, and it's possible there might be some issues like extra spaces or colons, things like that. If any issues come up, they'll be detected. Of course, it's best if everything works fine without any problems, but if there are issues, don't panic, just follow the prompts. Usually the error messages are pretty clear. They'll tell you which part of the syntax isn't quite right or doesn't conform to the specifications. That's all you need to do. Next, let's try accessing it. Let's access it and see. Also, it's just like we specified earlier, the domain name plus the path, right? We wrote two things in the file just now. One is the domain name, and the other is the path. So the domain name plus the path gives us our result, no problem. Forward. That wraps up this question. Actually, for this question, the main focus is just one file, but there are quite a few configuration details in that file that you need to pay attention to. Here, let me give everyone a quick look again. Of course, when you look at it like this, there's no color highlighting. If you really want to check it, it's actually better to use the VM command to view it. like this, right? The main thing you need to pay attention to here is this part. This is the most important section, because this is actually where problems are most likely to occur, specifically the ingress class name. This name needs to be determined based on the result of the previous command we queried. As for the other names, you must write them exactly as required. Make sure not to make any mistakes, alright? Including, of course, what ultimately affects the result. What else? Our domain name and path, if either of these is wrong, and also the curly brackets and the names, these here. Actually, for this question, every parameter can affect the final result. No matter which one is wrong, if your domain name is wrong, right? You can't access it. If the path is wrong, you can't access it either, right? If the service name is wrong or the port number is wrong, you still won't be able to connect to the corresponding backend service, and you won't be able to access the web page content either. So overall, this question is really about that. The troublesome part is that there are a lot of details to pay attention to, but the good thing is that as long as you get all these details right, you'll definitely get this question correct. If your answer to this question is wrong, what does that mean? It definitely means you made a mistake in one of these parameters. So, relatively speaking, it's also quite convenient to check. Here, what everyone needs to pay attention to is that if your syntax is all correct, but if the result is incorrect, what you need to do is just check the parameters. Alright, this is our final solution for this problem. Alright. In the future, I'll also be sharing solutions to other problems with everyone. If you're interested, feel free to discuss in the comments below. And if you have any questions, you can message me directly. Okay, that's all for today. Bye, everyone.